I'm sorry, I don't understand, I said, my voice tight with barely contained disbelief. You want to come back? Lena stood in the doorway of my apartment, a place she hadn't set foot in since she packed up her things and walked out a year ago. Her familiar silhouette was framed against the dim hallway light, but everything about her felt different now. Maybe it was me who was different. Maybe it was the fact that, this time, I wasn't the man she thought she had left behind. Yes, I want to come back, she repeated softly, her hands wringing nervously in front of her, a gesture I hadn't seen from her in years. She'd always been confident, so sure of herself. But now, standing here, she looked almost timid. I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. I had spent months trying to untangle the knot of pain and confusion she left behind. I could still remember the day she left. It was early in the morning, the sunlight just creeping through the blinds, painting the room in a warm glow that felt at odds with the icy words she threw at me. This isn't working for me anymore, Adam. I can't be with someone who's so distracted. Distracted. That's what she had called me. As if caring for my dying father, my only family, was some sort of inconvenience to her plans. As if watching him fade away, day by day, had been a choice. And now, here she was, standing in front of me, her eyes wide and pleading, as if none of that had happened. I don't get it, Lena, I said, crossing my arms over my chest, a defensive stance I didn't even realize I was taking. You made it pretty clear back then. You wanted out. You were done. What's changed? She looked down at her feet, her voice barely above a whisper. I made a mistake. A mistake? I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. You left me when I needed you the most, and now you're calling it a mistake? I didn't know how to handle it, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I was scared. Everything with your dad, it was too much. I didn't know how to be there for you. And then I heard about the inheritance. Ah. There it was. The truth slipped out like a snake slithering from its hiding place. I stared at her, my heart sinking. So this wasn't about regret, or love, or realizing she had made a horrible decision. This was about money. I see, I said coldly. So now that I'm a millionaire, you've suddenly realized you want to be with me again? Adam, it's not like that. Isn't it? I interrupted, stepping closer, feeling the anger simmering beneath my skin. Because from where I'm standing, that's exactly what it looks like. You walked out on me when my father was dying, when I was drowning in grief. And now that he's gone, and I've come into a fortune, you want to come back? Lena shook her head frantically, tears welling in her eyes. It's not about the money. I swear. I realized after I left how much I love you. How much I threw away. I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I've been trying to figure out how to fix it ever since. I scoffed. And the money just what? Helped give you the courage to knock on my door? She bit her lip, looking away. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the shame. But I wasn't sure if it was because she knew what she had done or because she had been caught. You think you can just waltz back into my life and everything will go back to how it was? I asked, my voice hard. After everything? I'm not asking for everything to go back to the way it was, she said, her voice cracking. I just want a chance to make things right. Please, Adam. Let me try. I stood there for a moment, staring at her, trying to understand how I could have ever loved someone like her. A year ago, I would have done anything for her. Hell, I probably would have taken her back in a heartbeat if she had come back right after leaving. But now? Now I was different. Losing my father had changed me. Inheriting his money had changed me. I wasn't the same desperate man she left. You know, I began, shaking my head, when my dad was in the hospital. He told me something I didn't understand at the time. He said, people will show you who they are when they think you have nothing left to offer. I didn't get it then, but I get it now. Lena's lips parted as if she was about to speak, but I cut her off. You showed me who you were when you left. You made your choice. And I've made mine. I don't need you in my life, Lena. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Please, Adam. No, I said firmly, stepping back. You left me when I needed you the most. I don't care if you regret it now. You don't get to come back just because things turned out better for me than you expected. She stared at me, and for a moment, I thought she might argue, but then she nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. I closed the door behind her, leaning my head against the cool wood, letting out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I was finally free. The door clicked shut with a finality I hadn't felt in a long time. I leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed, heart still racing from the confrontation. Lena's face kept flashing before me, the tears, the desperation in her voice, and that sliver of guilt in her eyes that hadn't quite been enough to move me. A part of me wondered if I had been too harsh. But no, every time I tried to soften, I remembered how she had abandoned me in my darkest hour, and the anger came rushing back. I pushed off the door, shaking my head. Enough. I wasn't going to let her haunt me anymore. I had already spent too much time thinking about her after she left, trying to make sense of something that, in the end, made no sense. She was gone, and I had survived. That was all that mattered now. The apartment felt quiet, too quiet. I glanced at the bottle of whiskey on the kitchen counter, tempted to pour a glass, but decided against it. I'd spent too many nights drowning myself in that bottle when my father was sick, trying to forget the slow, agonizing decline that had taken over his body. Now, I needed to stay clear-headed. There was too much at stake. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me from my thoughts. I picked it up and glanced at the screen. It was Marcus, my lawyer. I hesitated for a second, then swiped to answer. "Marcus, hey. Adam," he greeted, his voice smooth and professional as always. "Just checking in. Wanted to make sure you got the paperwork I sent over this morning." "Yeah, I got it," I replied, rubbing the back of my neck. "I've been meaning to go over it, but things have been a little hectic." "No problem. It's not urgent, but we'll need your signature by the end of the week to finalize the sale of the property." The property. My father's old house, the place where I had grown up. It had been sitting empty for months now, and I'd finally made the decision to sell it. It wasn't an easy choice, but I couldn't live there. Too many memories, too much pain. Besides, I didn't need the money. Between the house, the stocks, and the trust fund, my father had left me more than I could ever spend in a lifetime. "Yeah, I'll take care of it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Good. And, Adam, one more thing." Marcus paused, and I could hear him rifling through some papers on the other end of the line. "I've had a few inquiries about your situation." "My situation?" "The inheritance," Marcus clarified. Words gotten out, obviously. "I mean, it's not every day someone inherits millions overnight. A few investment firms have reached out, and there's been talk of partnerships. They want to meet with you." I rolled my eyes. Of course, they did. People were circling like vultures now that they knew I had money. Lena's visit wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. Everyone wanted a piece of it. Everyone suddenly had a reason to show up, like I was some sort of prize to be won. "I'm not interested," I said flatly. "I figured you'd say that," Marcus replied, chuckling softly. "But just hear me out. These aren't small-time operations. One of the firms is Wellington & Green. They specialize in legacy wealth management. The kind of firm that handles billionaires. They've helped some pretty notable clients." "Wellington & Green?" I repeated, my eyebrows raising despite myself. I'd heard of them. Everyone had. They were one of those names whispered in circles of old money, the kind of firm you didn't even know existed unless you were part of that world. They were exclusive, elite. "What do they want from me?" "They're interested in managing your assets," Marcus explained. "Expanding your portfolio, diversifying investments. They're offering to meet with you, no strings attached, just to give you some ideas. It could be a good opportunity." I hesitated, tapping my fingers against the counter. I didn't want to get sucked into some world of high finance, where every decision was about squeezing more money out of my fortune. But at the same time, Wellington & Green didn't exactly knock on just anyone's door. If they were reaching out, it meant they saw potential in what I had. Maybe it wasn't such a bad idea to at least hear them out. "All right," I said finally. "Set up a meeting. But I'm not committing to anything. I just want to hear what they have to say." "Understood," Marcus replied smoothly. "I'll make the arrangements and send you the details. You won't regret it, Adam. These guys are the real deal." We ended the call, and I set the phone down, my mind still buzzing. Lena, my father's house, Wellington & Green, it all felt like too much, too fast. A year ago, my life had been simple. I was just a guy trying to keep his father comfortable in his final days, and now, everything had changed. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights stretched out as far as I could see, a glittering sea of opportunity, danger, and temptation. I wondered how many of the people down there knew what it was like to be in my shoes. To have everything you thought you wanted dropped in your lap, only to realize you weren't sure if you even wanted it anymore. My thoughts were interrupted by another buzz from my phone. I glanced at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Great. Another call, probably someone else trying to pitch me something. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. "Hello? Adam?" The voice on the other end was deep, authoritative, and calm. "This is Jacob Green from Wellington & Green. I wanted to personally introduce myself before our meeting. I blinked, caught off guard. I hadn't expected the head of the firm himself to call. Hi. I didn't realize we'd be speaking directly. Green chuckled, the sound warm but sharp. I like to know my clients before we do business. From what I've heard, you're someone we'd very much like to work with. I swallowed, suddenly feeling the weight of this conversation. This wasn't some sales pitch. This was something bigger. I appreciate the call, I said carefully. I'll be at the meeting, but like I told my lawyer, I'm not sure about getting involved in all of this. Of course, Green replied smoothly. We'll talk more soon. I think you'll find that we can offer you something unique. The line clicked, and I stared at the phone, a strange feeling settling in my chest. Something told me this wasn't just a business opportunity. This was the beginning of something else entirely. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Wellington and Green. The towering office building downtown screamed success, power, and everything I wasn't sure I wanted to be a part of. I shifted in my chair, trying to get comfortable, but the weight of the situation pressed down on me. I was surrounded by polished mahogany tables, custom leather chairs, and walls adorned with abstract art that probably cost more than my entire apartment. Across the table, Jacob Green sat calmly, his hands folded in front of him. He was older than I had expected, probably in his late 50s, with sharp features, silver-streaked hair, and a presence that commanded attention. He wasn't a man who needed to speak loudly to make an impression. His quiet confidence was enough. Beside him sat a younger man, probably mid-30s, who hadn't said a word since I'd walked in. His neatly combed hair and tailored suit suggested he was some kind of junior associate, there to observe and take notes. But it was Green who had my attention. Thank you for coming, Adam, Green said, his voice low and calm, like a professor giving a lecture. I know this is a big step for you, and we don't take that lightly. I've read up on your situation, and I believe we can offer something that will secure your future, both financially and personally. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my nerves in check. I wasn't used to sitting in rooms like this, talking to people like him. I had been living paycheck to paycheck for years before my father passed. Even now, with more money than I knew what to do with, I still felt like an imposter in these settings. Look, I'm going to be honest, I said, leaning forward. I'm not sure I even want to do this. I've never been the kind of guy who cares about investments or growing a fortune. My dad left me this money, and I'm grateful, but I don't know if I want to live my life trying to make more. Green smiled, a small, knowing smile, like he had heard this speech 100 times before. I understand. You're not like our typical clients, Adam. You didn't build your wealth, it was handed to you. That's not a criticism, but it does mean that your relationship with it is different. You're still figuring out what this money means to you. I stared at him, surprised by how accurate his words were. It was exactly how I felt, like I didn't deserve this, like I was holding on to something I hadn't earned. The thing is, Green continued, money doesn't just sit idle. Whether you like it or not, it's always moving, always changing. And if you don't take control of it, someone else will. That's why we're here. To help you navigate this new reality you've found yourself in. I nodded, not entirely convinced but intrigued enough to keep listening. So, what exactly are you offering? Green leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. We're offering to manage your assets in a way that suits your values. We're not just talking about making more money, Adam. We're talking about securing your legacy. You can choose how your wealth is used, how it impacts the world. Philanthropy, ethical investments, building something that lasts long after you're gone. Whatever your vision is, we can help make it a reality. I let out a breath, staring down at the table. Legacy. The word felt heavy, like it didn't belong to me. My father had left a legacy. He'd built a business, taken care of me, and in the end, he'd left me more than I ever imagined. But what was I supposed to leave behind? What was my purpose now? Green seemed to sense my hesitation. You don't have to decide today, he said gently. But consider this, money is a tool. It can build or it can destroy, depending on how it's used. Right now, you have the opportunity to shape how your life, and your wealth, will be remembered. We're here to help you do that. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. It was too much to think about. A year ago, I was just trying to keep my head above water, and now I was being asked to think about my legacy? It felt like a lifetime had passed since my dad's funeral, since Lena walked out the door, and since the first check from the estate hit my account. I hadn't even processed half of it yet. I'll be honest, Green, I said after a long pause. I'm still not sure this is for me. I don't know what kind of legacy I want to leave, or if I even care about that kind of thing. That's fair, Green said, nodding. But let me ask you this, what do you care about? What do you want, Adam? I blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. What did I want? I'd been so consumed by grief, by the whirlwind of events after my father's death, that I hadn't stopped to ask myself that. I had been reacting, not living. I don't know, I admitted quietly. I haven't figured that out yet. Green leaned forward, his eyes intense but kind. Then maybe that's where we start. We're not just about managing wealth here, Adam. We're about helping people understand what they want, and how to use what they have to achieve it. This is about more than just dollars and cents. It's about building a life that feels meaningful to you. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the sales pitch I had been expecting. He wasn't pushing me to sign over my assets or dive into complex investment schemes. He was offering something more personal, something I hadn't even realized I needed: guidance. I sat there for a moment, trying to process everything. The idea of working with a firm like Wellington and Green still felt foreign to me, like stepping into a world I didn't belong in. But at the same time, maybe that's exactly why I needed their help. Because I didn't know what to do next, and I couldn't afford to make the wrong choices now. I'll think about it, I said finally, meeting Green's gaze. He nodded, smiling faintly. That's all I'm asking. Take your time. We're not in a rush, and neither should you be. When you're ready, we'll be here. I stood, shaking Green's hand, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't the resolution I had expected, but it was a step forward. As I walked out of the building and into the bright sunlight, I couldn't help but think about his question. What do you want? For so long, I had been chasing after the next thing: Lena, my father's approval, stability. But now, with everything in front of me, I realized I didn't have a clear answer. Maybe it was time I started figuring that out. The city streets buzzed with the familiar hum of traffic, pedestrians, and the distant roar of construction. I stepped out of the towering building that housed Wellington and Green, blinking against the afternoon sunlight. The air felt fresher out here, lighter somehow, but the weight of Jacob Green's words still hung over me like a cloud. What do you want? It was such a simple question, but I had no simple answer. I wandered down the street, my mind running in circles. Green had been right about one thing: I'd been reacting, not living. For the past year, I'd been trapped in survival mode, first caring for my father, then drowning in grief when he passed, and finally trying to adjust to the overwhelming reality of suddenly being rich. It was like I had been a passenger in my own life, watching as things happened around me, unsure how to take control. The inheritance had only made things more confusing. When I found out I'd become a millionaire, it didn't feel like a blessing, it felt like a burden. What was I supposed to do with it? What kind of life was I supposed to build now that I didn't have to worry about money? It was a question I hadn't even considered until Green asked. I ducked into a small cafe on the corner, the kind of place I used to go to with Lena on lazy Sunday mornings. A wave of nostalgia hit me as I sat at a table by the window, remembering how simple things used to be before everything got so complicated. The waitress brought over a cup of black coffee, and I stared into it, my mind drifting back to Lena. Her face, the desperation in her eyes when she stood at my door, pleading to come back. A year ago, I would have given anything to hear those words from her. But now? I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding me in the present. She wasn't part of the equation anymore. She had made her choice when she left. Now, it was my turn to make mine. I couldn't keep looking back, trying to understand what went wrong. I had to move forward. But how? My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, half expecting another call from Marcus or someone else trying to push me into some deal. Instead, it was a message from Sarah, my cousin. We hadn't talked much since the funeral, but she had been one of the few family members who stayed in touch during my dad's illness. She'd offered to help in those final weeks, but I had turned her down, too wrapped up in my own grief to accept any help. Hey Adam, just thinking about you. It's been a while. Wanna grab a drink sometime? I stared at the message for a moment. I hadn't seen Sarah since the will was read, and we hadn't been close before that, not really. But something about her reaching out now, when I felt more lost than ever, felt like a lifeline. Maybe it was time I stopped isolating myself. Sure, let's meet up this week, I replied, and immediately felt a strange sense of relief. Like maybe reconnecting with her could be the first step toward figuring things out. I finished my coffee and headed back out into the street, the noise of the city a comforting distraction from the mess of thoughts in my head. I walked without any real destination, just letting my feet carry me through familiar streets. Eventually, I found myself in front of the old neighborhood bookstore, the one I used to visit as a kid with my dad. The windows were still cluttered with mismatched displays of bestsellers and forgotten classics, just as they had always been. I stepped inside, the smell of old paper and worn leather instantly calming me. The store was mostly empty, save for the old man behind the counter who gave me a polite nod. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers along the spines of books I hadn't touched in years. It felt like I was reconnecting with a part of myself I had lost somewhere along the way. As I browsed, I couldn't help but think about the conversation with Green again. Legacy. The word had sounded too big, too grand for someone like me. But as I stood there, surrounded by the quiet comfort of the bookstore, I realized that maybe a legacy didn't have to be about building an empire or leaving behind millions of dollars. Maybe it was about something smaller, more personal. I picked up an old paperback, one of my father's favorites, The Old Man and the Sea. I hadn't thought about that book in years, but suddenly I remembered the afternoons we used to spend reading together. My dad loved stories like that, simple, but full of meaning. He always said that you didn't need to change the world to leave a legacy. You just needed to be true to yourself, to live in a way that meant something to you. As I stood there, holding that book in my hands, I realized that maybe that was what I needed to do. I didn't have to figure out everything right now. I didn't have to decide my entire future in one moment. But I could start small. I could focus on what really mattered to me, not what everyone else thought I should do with the money. I left the bookstore with the book tucked under my arm, feeling lighter than I had in months. The fog in my mind had started to clear, just a little, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I knew where to begin. A few days later, I found myself sitting at a dimly lit bar, waiting for Sarah. The place was cozy, with worn wooden booths and a jukebox that played a mix of old rock and country songs. It wasn't the kind of place I usually went to, but it had a charm that felt right for this moment. I spotted Sarah as soon as she walked in, her curly brown hair bouncing as she scanned the room for me. She smiled when she saw me, and I waved her over. "Adam," she greeted, sliding into the booth across from me. "It's so good to see you. It's been too long." "Yeah," I admitted, feeling a little guilty. "Sorry I haven't been in touch much. Things have been. You know." She waved off my apology with a smile. "Don't worry about it. I can't imagine what you've been going through. But I'm glad you reached out." We ordered drinks, and for a while, we made small talk, catching up on her life and the things I had missed while I'd been holed up in my apartment, dealing with the fallout of my father's death. But eventually, the conversation turned to the thing that had been hanging over both of us, the inheritance. "How's everything going with the estate?" Sarah asked gently. "I mean, it must be a lot to handle." I sighed, swirling the ice in my glass. "Yeah, it's been overwhelming. I had a meeting with this big financial firm the other day. They want to help me secure my legacy or whatever. But honestly, I don't even know what that means. I don't know what I want to do with all of this." Sarah nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Adam. Your dad didn't build his legacy overnight. It took him years to figure out what he wanted. You've got time to decide." "I know," I said quietly. "But it feels like everyone's waiting for me to make a move. Like I'm supposed to know what to do just because I have all this money." "You don't owe anyone anything," she said firmly. "This is your life. Your money. Don't let anyone pressure you into something you're not ready for." Her words hit me hard. She was right. I had been so caught up in what other people expected of me that I hadn't stopped to think about what I wanted. And the truth was, I wasn't ready to dive into some high-stakes world of wealth and power. I needed time to figure out what mattered to me. "Thanks, Sarah," I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I think I needed to hear that. She smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Anytime, Adam. We're family. I'm here for you." As we sat there, talking and laughing like old friends, I realized that maybe my dad had been right all along. A legacy wasn't about the money. It was about the people you cared for, the relationships you built, and the life you lived. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I didn't need to. I just needed to take it one step at a time. And maybe that was enough.